So I'm sitting in the old IMS. Some of you, a lot of you have heard this. And I've been practicing mindful for weeks, and I was really getting good at it. I was very proud of myself. So you're noting, right? You're noting seeing, you're noting hearing. What do you all notice right now, by the way? So you're noting, the sensation of your feet on the floor. I was doing very well, and I think this was the 3-month retreat, so I'd been doing it for a while. So at one point, so I'm sitting, and all of a sudden I hear this creaking sound, and then it went loud, and it would go creak and loud, and then, so it ended, but I noted it, hearing. Do you remember this story, Beverly? And so then, I was just fine. I went back to watching my breath, belly. And then all of a sudden, happened about 4 minutes later, there's a creak, and then this loud noise. Hearing. I was really proud of myself. I was really mindfully noticing hearing. That happened about 5 times. After the 5th time, I thought, what the hell is going on? So I opened my eyes, of course. And next to me was this gentleman sitting in a chair, and he was falling asleep. So, right? So he would lean forward, creak, and then he would straighten up. Now, some of you do that. I won't name who does it. Fortunately for us now, we have this silent place, so we don't, we can't hear you as you're doing it. Well, that kind of cleared up the mystery of it, and so then from then on, it's sort of like I could close my eyes. That went on for the whole thing. But I was very proud of myself. I was being very mindful, right? Hearing. So then the bell rang, and it was 12 o'clock, and so I went to lunch, and so I was standing in line. And all of a sudden, I realized that I had murder in my mind. I was furious. I was absolutely furious, right? And at first I didn't know what, it was just anger, And then slowly I realized, oh my God, right? I hadn't been mindful at all. The truth is, I was really angry with that guy, right? And I was sitting there noticing hearing, right? So mindfulness can be very tricky, right? It can be very tricky. In other words, you can be noticing, seeing when in fact it's lusting, as Lisa is doing for me right this minute. No, really you could be seeing, and when in fact it is lusting, or it's aversion, or that's the ugliest person I ever saw, right? Right? So in other words, mindfulness really is this ability to see exactly what is going on here, right? It's all about, it's an inside job. It's not about seeing what that is. To be mindful of that, there's a certain way that one could be mindful of that. And it's in the sutra, Satipatthana Sutra. But it begins with being mindful of this, right? In other words, if you lose this, there's no way you can be mindful of that. It's just not even remotely possible. And we do confuse that because we can think of mindfulness as being observant of the outside. If we lose connection to this, what's going on inside, it isn't mindfulness. I don't know what it is. But that will fit with what I'm getting ready to read. So, I'm just going to read it. I want to ask you. I can ask a lot of questions. So this is going to be fairly long. I'm going to just set this up by telling you that I think there were 135 letters back, comments from meditators. and everyone hates this article. So don't get. So in other words, just be aware that if you don't like what these people are saying, you're not alone. It was interesting, and the letters were brilliant. They were brilliant and interesting, and I actually printed some of them out, but I thought it'd be worth reading again sometime. But this is pretty interesting. I think it was called Breathing In and Spacing Out. I believe that's what it was called. No good. Breathing in, spacing out. And you know, in truth, in terms of sitting, I actually suspect that's not what it's about. I do suspect that that basically we lose our focus when we exhale, when we're sitting. Right? You're sitting there breathing in. That's pretty. You know, there's sensation, right? You can feel that. And then you can go space out when you exhale. 2.5 millenniums ago, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama, you've heard of him, traveled to Bodh Gaya, India, and began to meditate beneath a tree. 49 days of continuous meditation later, tradition tells us he became the Buddha in Enlightenment. He left out 6 years before that, right? He practiced 6 years before he sat under that old tree. More recently, a psychologist named Amisha Jha traveled to Hawaii to train United States Marines to use the same technique for shorter sessions to achieve a much different purpose: mental resilience in a war zone. Quote, "We found that getting as little as 12 minutes of meditation practice a day helped the Marines to keep their attention and working memory. That is, the added ability to pay attention over time, they could keep it stable," said Jha, director of the University of Miami's Contemplative Neuroscience Mindfulness Research and Practice Initiative. If they practiced less than 12 minutes or not at all, they degraded in their functioning, meaning they actually went back to their baseline, right? If they didn't do that, they just went back to whatever their baseline is. But 12 minutes seemed to be the optimal for really ratcheting up their attention. 12 minutes of solid mindfulness, it's pretty amazing, really, if you think about it. I mean, when we're sitting, right, when I was talking about the light of mindfulness shining, right, I think 10 seconds is pretty good, you know. But that's not really what they're talking about anyway, because it is, but 12 minutes of that work seemed to be quite effective with the Marines. They could shoot better. I made that up. Jha, whose program has received a $1.7 million 4-year grant from the Department of Defense. Don't you love it? The Department of Defense is investigating mindfulness. I just love it. Okay. Described her results at a bastion of scientific conservatism, the New York Academy of Sciences, during a meeting on the science of mindfulness. I think this is fascinating. Yet mindfulness hasn't long been part of serious scientific discourse. She first heard another scientist mention the word meditation during a lecture in 2005. I thought, I can't believe he just used that word in this audience, because it wasn't something I had ever heard someone utter in a scientific context, Jha said. Although pioneers like John Kabat-Zinn, now emeritus professor at the University of Mass, began teaching mindfulness meditation as a means of reducing stress as far back as the 1970s, all but a dozen or so of the nearly 100 randomized clinical trials have been published since 2005. And the most recent studies of mindfulness, the simple, non-judgmental observation of a person's breath, body, or just about anything else. Now, so that she's presuming to, I shouldn't say that, she is defining mindfulness as the simple, non-judgmental observation of a person's breath, body, or anything else. Not too bad, right? Simple, non-judgmental observation are taking the practice in directions that might have shocked the Buddha. In addition to military fitness, scientists are now testing brief stints of mindfulness training as a means to improve scores on standardized tests and lay down new connections between brain cells. So this is pretty interesting. Michael Posner of the University of Oregon and Yiwan Tong of Texas Tech University used diffusion tensor imaging before and after participants spent a combined 11 hours over 2 weeks practicing a form of mindfulness meditation developed by Tong. They found that it enhanced the integrity and efficiency of the brain's white matter, the tissue that connects and protects neurons emanating from the anterior cingulate cortex, a region of particular importance for rational decision making and effortful problem solving. You can get behind that, Lisa. Right? Perhaps this is why mindfulness has proved beneficial to prospective graduate students. In May, the Journal of Psychological Science published the results of a randomized trial showing that undergraduates instructed to spend a mere 10 minutes a day for 2 weeks practicing mindfulness made significant improvement on the verbal portion of the graduate record exam, a gain of 16 percentile points. They also significantly increased their working memory capacity, the ability to maintain and manipulate multiple items of attention. This doesn't go on too much longer. So that's pretty important, isn't it? And it's pretty much validated by many, many studies. That a practice once synonymous with Eastern mysticism could be put to the service of Western rationalism may sound surprising, but consider, by emphasizing a focus on the here and now, it trains the mind to stay on task and avoid distractions. Your ability to recognize what your mind is engaging with and control that is really a core strength, said Peter Malinowski, a psychologist and neuroscientist at Liverpool, John Moores University in England. For some people who begin mindfulness training, it's the first time in their life where they realize that a thought, now I love this sentence. So this is really why, I'm not criticizing this article. I mean, you're training Marines, maybe this is really an amazingly important sentence. It's the first time in their life for many people where they realize that a thought or an emotion is not their only reality. That they have the ability to stay focused on something else, for instance, like breathing. That's pretty amazing, right? I mean, that's really true. I mean, the ability to have a thought or a feeling and not, fuse with it, but just go back to your breathing can be an extraordinary moment of freedom. But one of the most surprising, now this is where we're going to get in trouble, one of the most surprising findings of recent mindfulness studies is that it could have unwanted side effects. I just love that. Raising roadblocks to the mind's peregrinations could, after all, prevent the various sort of mental vacations that lead to epiphanies. Did you get that? Did I read that? I didn't read that so well, did I? I'll read it again. Okay, so mindfulness could become a roadblock to an epiphany, an aha moment. These people are suggesting. In 2012, Jonathan Schooler, who runs a lab investigating mindfulness and created at University of California, my Lord, right? I mean, all of these schools are investigating mindfulness at the University of California in Santa Barbara, published a study entitled "Inspired by Distraction, Mind Wandering Facilitates Creative Incubation." Lisa is nodding. She's you've been in college too long, bro. In it, he found that having participants spend a brief period of time on an undemanding task, let's say stacking boxes, that maximizes mind wandering, improves their subsequent performance on a test of creativity. I think that's pretty. In a follow-up study, he reported that physicists and writers alike came up with their most insightful ideas while spacing out. A third of the creative ideas that they had during a 2-week period came when the minds were wandering, he said, and those were more likely to be characterized by aha insights that overcame an impasse. The trick is knowing when mindfulness is called for and when it's not. When you're staring out the window, you may well be coming up with your great next idea, he said, but you're not paying attention to the teacher. So the challenge is finding a balance between mindfulness and mind wandering. If you're driving in a difficult situation, operating machinery, it's good to be mindful. I'm skipping that over. Another potential drawback to mindfulness has been identified by researchers at Georgetown University. All these people are studying mindfulness. In that study, presented at the Society for Neuroscience annual meeting in November, they found that the higher adults scored on a measurement of mindfulness, the worse they performed on implicit learning. You heard that one, Lisa? Well, we'll get to this. The kind that underlines acquired skills. In the study, participants were shown a long sequence of items, almost finished people, and it reportedly challenged to guess which one would come next. Although it was supposedly random, actually there was a pattern underneath. And if you practiced mindfulness, you tended not to get that pattern underneath, but if your mind was wandering, the intuition would catch it. There's so much of our brain doing what we're not aware of, the study said. We know that being mindful is really good for a lot of explicit cognitive functions, but it might not be so useful when you want to form new habits, learning to ride a bicycle, speak grammatically, or interpret the meaning of people's facial expressions are examples of implicit learning, what they call learning by osmosis. This is the last paragraph. After meditating upon such sacrilegious findings, I like that he said that. That was a sacrilegious finding. No doubt the Buddha, who taught a middle way between worldly and spiritual concerns, would have agreed that there is a time for using mindfulness to discover inner truths, a time for using it to survive a battle or an exam, and a time to let go of mindfulness so that the mind may wander the universe. I read this actually at the Forest Refuge, and I saved it. I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be a very good topic of conversation. The letters that people wrote were mostly they had a real difficult time with this, and they didn't like it. And mostly people, almost everyone who had something to say that I probably read 40 letters, responses. They were meditators. There were many things about this that really fascinated me, and I've always had that. I have this. I've had this thought for a long time that there are a lot of dangers involved in our westernizing, these Buddhist concepts, these Buddhist teachings, and on the other hand, I certainly don't know yet, and I think we're too much in the beginning of it to really know. I mean, we can't make definitive statements, but I just wanted to make a few general comments about this, and from my perspective. First of all, one of the things they didn't say is that in the context of the Eightfold Path, it's not called mindfulness, it's called right mindfulness. It's called samasati. It's not called sati. It's called samasati. So right off the bat, right, I mean, the Buddha might have a little bit of difficulty with training Marines. I don't know that, really and truly, I don't know. But in other words, but it's really easy, and I think I said this like in the bare bones, the idea that ripping something out of its soil and putting it in a nice little vase and calling it this and calling it that, right? Sometimes if you take something out of its context, you actually can really lose the essence of what it is. So mindfulness, in my opinion, when it is divorced from the Eightfold Path, we're talking about some other animal, and I don't know what we're talking about exactly, but and so that's one of the problems of taking it and putting it in a study. Because what is the Eightfold Path? First of all, some people will begin with the practice of morality or ethics, but I mean mindfulness will be comes after Shila. But in other words, the practice of not all of the precepts and right living, right, right speech, right action. Those three are the aspects of whatever you want to call it, ethics and morality. But so in other words, you can't, in terms of, if you're talking about Buddhist mindfulness, you can't divorce mindfulness from the practice of morality, because it's part of it. It comes in the next division. That's number one. So number one, there's the word right that goes with it. Number two, it must be considered in the context of the Eightfold Path. But number three, and this is the one that so kind of interested me, I thought I would talk about it next week. What happens with you when you separate it from concentration, right concentration, samadhi, right? Because if you think about the Eightfold Path, mindfulness is number 7. Number 8 is samadhi, and so if you begin with the factors of awakening, right? We started with mindfulness, right? And we went down, but as the process of the mind opening and awakening continues to unfold, we go to a place where the mind goes into an incredible state of unification, right? Of one-pointedness. And if we divorce, separate out mindfulness from this idea of not being interested in ridding ourselves of greed, hatred, and delusion, right? I mean, that's what it's about. Mindfulness is part of the process of discovering the truth of greed, hatred, and delusion, and or the truth of impermanence, suffering, and no self. So it's really fascinating to read what is, I think, is happening more and more in the West, right? Is that we're taking these aspects of the Eightfold Path, and you can see what happens to them when they're divorced of the context, when they're pulled out of what they've been used for in terms of awakening. So you can think of mindfulness as a way to tremendously improve cognitive skill. And I think it probably would. But I suppose, I don't know how to say this exactly. I think that would be a Western version of what mindfulness is, improving cognitive skills. But I think in the context of sati, the way I think of it and the way I describe it, I don't think that you can put into words what it really is in the first place. When we pull it down into words, when we pull it down into something concrete, we've lost the mystery of it. And I think that's the one thing about this. I mean, that is opposed to the very excellent letters. I think that it's so demystified it. It's so taken away something that you cannot put into words. So what did the Buddha say? He said, sitting in a secluded place under a tree, her into a secluded hut. And he said, and placing mindfulness before you. That's all he said. Placing mindfulness before you. You know, and so then we read that, and then we start saying, well, it's this or that. We start defining it. We start capturing it into words, and back to the sitting that we were doing. To have this aspiration, to have this light that's shining all the way through the factors of awakening, interest and energy and joy and tranquility, and then samadhi, which is profound. Samadhi is profound, and then equanimity, and then you're on the verge of the mind totally waking up. Is there's something about awe, having a sense of awe, right? Absolute awe and wonder, and I would almost say bewilderment. What the hell is mindfulness? What is it? It's beyond words, and to try to put it into Western, the way we do, the way we squeeze it in, it's just not very skillful. So anyway, I actually enjoyed this article. I thought it was a good article, and I didn't feel terribly critical of it, as it is. It's like, but if you read that from the context of this is that they're talking about, like when at the University of California, Santa Barbara, or another, if they're assuming that they are talking about sati as the Buddha meant it, they're way off.